Muy bien, muy buenas noches y bienvenidos.
Good evening and welcome. Welcome to this International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. A date, a commemoration that, as you know, Casa Árabe, the Arab house, has got very much present in the calendar with regards to our commitment not just with the Palestinian cause, but also with this date that since 1967, the Organization for the United Nations has established in the calendar to highlight the situation of the Palestinian people and be able to devote a full date to it. The other date that the Arab House has got is the 15th of May. Today we have the pleasure of having with us Ilan, Pappé and Ramzy Baroud, the co-editors of this book called Our Vision for Liberation, which is a work of visualization of a series of voices in the space of reflection on not just the present but the future of the Palestinian nation. These days also important to highlight that we're here in Cordoba, in our seat in Cordoba, and we developed this activity in cooperation with the UNESCO Chair for the Resolution of Conflicts of the University of Cordoba, whose director is Manuel Torres Aguilar, who's also with us today. Thanks very much for being here, Manuel. What is that we understand as liberation? Maybe something which was erased from the lexicon of the political fight of Palestine, but which appeared in different corners in the planet, and it was also once again appeared by insisting on the notions of the rule of law to guarantee peace. And considering the agreements of Oslo, there's a big vacuum which in the paradigm has opened a space for the articulation of new possibilities, of new speeches or narratives which may help facing the challenges that the Palestinians face today. This book, which will be described by our guests today, gathers together a series of personality, experts, specialists, which offer us testimonies, first-hand testimonies on that inspiration from different disciplines, and which show us the diversity of the Palestinian people, which also highlights many of its successes and which are coming from different disciplines such as archaeology, psychiatrics, cinema, art, science, diplomacy, and also showing the high level of education and preparation that Palestinians have. Also, it speaks to us about experiences in jail, which of course affect the development of the Palestinian people. At the introduction, I'm just going to translate one of the sentences of Ilan Pappé. He says that solidarity cannot be left in just a a sound track, but it should be confronting the realities that the Israeli colonialism means. And so thanks very much to you all connected through our YouTube channel. We will be broadcasting the session in English, and we will be broadcasting the session in Spanish later on. And I just wanted to offer a small CV of our colleagues. Ramzy Baroud is an American Palestinian writer. He is the Deputy Director of Middle East Eye, and he's also worked as the head of the Department of Research in the website of Al Jazeera in English. He's the author of about 6 books, and his just volume is this one, co-edited with Ilan Pappé. Ilan Pappé, for those of you who do not know him, is an international character. He's a professor in history at the University of Exeter in the UK. He founded the Institute for Peace in Khadiba, and he was the director at the city of Haifa of Palestinian Studies, and was also had also tenure at the Department of Political Sciences in Haifa. He's also a very abundant writer. For example, on the book The Cleansing of Palestine, and he's also got a BA by the University of Jerusalem and a PhD by the University of Oxford. And Manuel Torres Aguilar is a dean, the head of the chair for the resolution of conflicts, and has organized international conferences such as Cordoba, the City for Encounter, and Deputy President for Students right now. He is the head of the Inter-University Master course on human conflicts and resolution, human rights and resolution of conflicts. Thanks for your kind introduction, and thanks for inviting the chair for conflict resolution of the University of Cordoba to take part in this event with Ilan Pappé, and for using this venue to launch your book once again. Maybe this is the international conflict which suffers from a bigger array of complexities from the ones we have known, and maybe it's also one of the most difficult in terms of the search for solution and conceptualization. It is true that the Agreements of Oslo of 1993 was a proposal which opened the door for hope, but we've got to ascertain, as the authors explain in the book, that it's a frustrated reality. And following what in global terms was referred to as the Arab Spring, in the Middle East, a series of hopes, of expectations were born, and the civil and social peace concept appeared as an idea to be taken into account in Palestine. But the situation of powerlessness and despair that has permeated the political life there has shown that civil peace is revealing itself and no solution. And in the concept of the raising tensions, which led to the deterioration of the situation of the occupied Palestinian state, Palestine never got out of the discussion on how civil peace can be applied. The peaceful coexistence in the end today means institutionalized discrimination against the Palestinian living both in Israel and in the occupied territories. So these instead should lead to short-term solution attempts, but the situation is not that way. So it doesn't resemble that which I have described. The setting up of the Palestinian Authority also saw the ground to a new environment for the blooming of social traditions. But because of the political division between Fatah and Hamas, efforts have been frustrated in terms of the unification of the legal system. Maybe the most significant period was the one open through the legislation published by the Legislative Council, especially after the elections of 1996. In any case, the political division, the context of hatred speech, and the geographical separation between the territories of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank has made it very difficult for any of these attempts to succeed. And that geographic and division, that structuring of different Palestinian communities around different political realities imposed by Israel, starting with the Oslo Agreement in the areas known as ABC, an important division has been introduced in the political organization and the aspirations to build a Palestinian state in the area of the occupied territories. That occupation has led to the isolation of the capital city, which was one of the targets for the definition of the Palestinian state. So, starting from this difficult puzzle, let's hope that this new liberation perspective is any sort of a positive contribution, but we're still waiting for improvements, for new advancements. So I would like to thank, considering this difficult environment, I would like to thank the two authors for creating a work like this, and let's hope this conflict is open up sometime, even if we are not very full of hope right now. It's a conflict which is coexisting with other conflicts and which hit the headlines depending on the reality of the time. Thanks very much once again, and thanks to Casa Árabe for the invitation.
Okay, thank you. Let's look at the watch. Okay, thank you for coming to this meeting. Thank you for Casa Árabe for inviting Dr. Baroud and myself. And thank you for those who are watching us in live streaming. The book that we present today was a project that was born out of a long period of contemplation and a wish to present a different angle on the liberation struggle in Palestine and on the people involved in it. most of the histories of the liberation movement and even the discussion of the liberation movement today focus on organizations, on leaders, political elites. And it's not a secret that since 1983, the Palestinian leadership of the liberation movement is in crisis. The expulsion of the PLO from Beirut created the first crisis. The mistake of signing the Oslo Agreement in 1993 created another crisis for the Palestinian leadership. But one has to admit that even before 1983, the Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948, fragmented the Palestinian people to such an extent that it was quite an achievement for the Palestinian Liberation Organization in its first years to keep a liberation movement alive and quite united before the list of catastrophes that I just mentioned appeared. But since 1983, the sense of people who are studying the liberation movement, who are interested in the history of Palestine, is of a disunited Palestinian liberation movement. People like to talk about the Hamas and the Fatah, about the Palestinians inside Israel, the Palestinians in the West Bank, or the Gaza Strip as different entities, different Palestinian groups. And therefore, the analysis is that because of this disunity, the Palestinians are unable to move forward in their either so-called peace process or the liberation struggle. When we started to interview, not to interview actually, to invite contributions from almost 40 leading Palestinians from all over the world, from different generations, men and women, we found out that the reality on the ground is very different from the image that I've just provided you. First of all, we found a very united liberation movement, whether people were more religious, less religious, whether people were Christians or Jews, whether there were young people from Chile or older people from Lebanon, they all shared a similar vision for liberation. And what was so unique about the vision that they shared was that it was articulated in a language that is very different from the language that the mainstream media in Spain and in many other parts of the world use to refer to the question of Palestine, of the issue of Palestine. For one thing, they don't talk about the conflict. There's no conflict between an occupier and occupied. There's no conflict between a colonizer and colonized. There's no conflict between someone who commits ethnic cleansing and the victims of ethnic cleansing. And there's no conflict between a state that perpetrates a genocide and the victims of a genocide. These are not conflicts. Israel had a conflict with Egypt. It had a conflict with Jordan. It had a conflict with Syria. It doesn't have a conflict with the Palestinians. It wages a war of extermination against the Palestinians. And therefore, the vision of liberation is not to dream about peace with the Israelis. It's first and foremost to stop the destruction of Palestine and the Palestinian. This is the first thing that comes out. These are people that personally experienced how the Zionist movement before 1948 and the State of Israel after 1948 did all it could to get rid of them, either by expelling them, or by imprisoning them, or by killing them, or wounding them. And therefore, the vision for liberation, first of all, is a vision of stopping the colonization, the occupation, the ethnic cleansing, in the case of the Gaza Strip, the genocide. And I think this is something that we hope that the book would educate people to use a different language from the one a lot of commentators and politicians who mean well in the case of Palestine are using a language that does not help to change the reality on the ground. So that's the first point that I think was very important for us. It's a united group of people using the same language, understanding exactly what they were facing and what they are facing, and telling the world what they want to happen. They don't want to throw anyone to the sea. They don't want to kill anyone. They don't want to bomb anyone. They want to be saved from a project that has intended their destruction from the late 19th century until today. The second part that I think was very important for us that came out is that when Palestinians and individuals faced the Zionist settler colonial movement up to 1948, and especially those who experienced either as a first generation or a second generation, the catastrophe of 1948, the Nakba. All these Palestinians were fully aware of the magnitude of the disaster that they were experiencing. If you want, they talk very clearly about the trauma of, in one day, losing your house, losing your field, losing your family, losing your country, losing a life of existence and substituting it with living in a tent in a refugee camp. So they are very much aware of their trauma, and the trauma accompanies them through the life. As I said, doesn't matter whether it's first generation, namely people who experienced it individually, or people who, this experience was transferred to the next generation. We know this kind of things from the Holocaust, and I come from a family that I lost most of my family members in the Holocaust, but I'm a second generation, so I'm very much aware, and I was very touched, because I feel very much like they do, that even if it doesn't happen to you, you feel that it happened to you. Although, of course, chronologically, you couldn't be there, but it's still part of your identity and life. But what was so impressive about these people is that although they acknowledge the enormity of the trauma that they experienced, they don't let the trauma to define them. Namely, from the moment they found themselves in a refugee tent, in exile, whether in the Arab world or in Europe or in America or in Latin America, they immediately rebuilt their life. Immediately they tried for themselves and for their families to have a dignified, respectful life. And at the same time, all these people who contributed to our book made sure that they are still committed to the liberation struggle. And sometimes this decision to rebuild a career that was lost as a journalist, as an academic, as a banker, the decision to make sure that this career is rebuilt without losing the commitment for the liberation meant that certain sacrifices had been made. People gave up on much better opportunities for better life, for better professional careers, in order to make sure that their own professional career serves also the liberation struggle. This is a strong message to the Israelis. They feel very strong now. They are so powerful compared to the Palestinians. And the world is so indifferent to the Palestinian suffering. And they see the double talk, the Israelis see the double talk about the Ukraine compared to how people cover Palestine. And yet the message from these Palestinians is, you will not get rid of us. We will show resilience and we will show resistance, and we will continue. You don't have the power to complete your project of ethnic cleansing and elimination. The last thing I want to say that we learned from this group of people, really amazing stories that these people brought to the fore about their life is the way that they succeeded in creating actually a human capital, if I can use this word, a human capital, a human energy, a human resources, that if you, from a moment, pause and think, what would have happened if this human capital would have been invested in Palestine? What a wonderful place Palestine would have been had the Nakba not occurred. And how do we know that this is such an incredible, remarkable human capital? Because we know that that human capital was invested in other Arab countries. This human capital built the Iraqi educational system, the Lebanese financial system, the civil service in Jordan, the media in Kuwait. So we know that these group of people, the Palestinians, have a lot to give to themselves and to the societies around themselves. The only thing we pray and hope that one day this human capital and potential would be reinvested in a liberated and free Palestine. As for the vision themselves, of course people might have different visions how exactly a liberated Palestine would look like. But I can tell you for sure, and this is something the world has to hear, Palestine in the eyes of the Palestinians is not the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Palestine is in Haifa, Palestine is in Jaffa, Palestine is in Safad, Palestine is in the Nakab. The world thinks that because it was able to impose on a certain group of Palestinian politicians a reduced definition of Palestine, that this is the vision of liberation. Palestinians don't want to liberate the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. They want to liberate historical Palestine, and they have the moral right to do so. Secondly, the Palestinians are not only the people who live in historical Palestine. The Palestinians are also the people who live as refugees, either in refugee camps or in exilic communities around the world. And without a solution that also catered for these Palestinians, there will be no peace and no justice in Palestine. These are very non-violent people. You will see when you read their stories. And they are urging the world to allow them to live normal life. Just normal life. And normal life is something Israel cannot allow the Palestinians to have. So I hope that you will share these stories, admire them as much as I do, be enhanced and empowered by these stories, but also take into account that this is not just about utopia, about the future. Palestine has the youngest society in the world. 50% of the Palestinians are below 18. 50%. Therefore, if Israel wages a war against the Palestinian, it wages a war against children. But these children would one day continue the liberation struggle. And 250 Israeli nuclear weapons, the strongest army in the world, the support of all Europe and America would not help them against the people who for the last 120 years have not given up the vision of liberation for their homeland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilan, for this presentation of what is inside the book, but also for making this book possible. One of the ideas of bringing you to Spain is also to make this visible and hopefully find you a Spanish publisher because of the potential impact that this may have within the literature about Palestine in the Spanish language. Ramzy, your turn. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kareem. Thanks to Casa Árabe, to all of you, and to Ilan for that lovely start of the conversation. Where Ilan finished talking about the population of Palestine, the demographics of Palestine, 50% being under the age of 18. I know just this quote that just came through my mind of Ghassan Kanafani, a great Palestinian intellectual who was assassinated by Israel in 1972, when he said, I think it was in his novel, The Land of Sad Oranges, where he said, we were mistaken when we thought that the homeland belongs to the past. The homeland belongs to the future. And this is really the question. It's a question of representation. You know, we can talk about Palestine, Israel, conflict, Hamas, Fatah, the various, you know, supposed narratives and counter-narratives regarding this issue. We can talk about Area A and B and C and the Paris Protocol and the Hebron Agreement and who fulfilled his side of the agreement and who didn't. But as far as the Palestinian people are concerned, those living in refugee camps in Gaza, under siege, those who are barely subsisting in the West Bank, those who are living in isolation in East Jerusalem, those who are living in under this draconian, discriminatory laws in Israel itself, the Palestinian population of 1948, or the Palestinians living in Lebanon, in Jordan, and elsewhere. Many of those found themselves, you know, having to travel across the Mediterranean, escaping from the horrendous lives they have left behind in refugee camps and in war zones, in order for them to search for a better life somewhere else. And sadly, for most of them, those lives end up being at the bottom of the sea somewhere. For them, none of this language matters. None of these references are relatable in any way. It's just politics, and it's just meant for media consumptions and public consumptions, and they do not correspond to reality in any way. But I think, you know, the general public are not the only ones, those who consume Western media's news reporting from Palestine and subjected to the relentless reductionism of Western academia, are not the only ones who are, you know, having to face the illusions as far as what actually happening in Palestine. And as Ilan said, it really is not a conflict. It has never been a conflict. But I also think that the Israelis themselves and their supporters, Western governments, are themselves living that illusion as well. You remember after the terrorist attacks of 9/11, where many in the US media, experts, talking heads everywhere from Fox to CNN, to American officials, to ordinary people asking questions such as, why do they hate us so much? You know, why do they hate us so much? And you try, seriously, this is the question, this is your thesis? You are not in any way aware of everything that has happened in that region from the start of the early colonial movements all the way to the destruction of Iraq, and including the Israeli occupation of Palestine, the blind American supports of Israel, the support of oppressive Arab rulers throughout the Middle East. And now you come after all of this to ask the question, why do they hate us so much? I was reminded actually of that yesterday. I was reading this article translated from Yodaot Ahronot, an Israeli newspaper, about two Israeli journalists who went to Qatar to be part of the World Cup festivities. They thought, well, Qatar hasn't officially normalized, but this is a great opportunity to just kind of do some sort of non-official normalization. We'll go to the streets, we talk to people, we bring Arab fans of football to talk to us, and everywhere they went, they would introduce themselves, and when people realized that they are Israelis, they would say, no, thank you. I'm not going to talk to you. Or there's a famous video of a Saudi man who lectured the Israeli journalist, you're killing my brothers and my sisters in Palestine. I'm not going to talk to you. And Saudi Arabia is one of these countries that, you know, we've been told they are on the brink of normalization with Israel. So they are writing this article, and here's the irony of it all. They are writing this article that we couldn't conduct a single interview with any Arab, even Brazilians, even people from Mexico, Ecuador, Brazil, they just don't want to talk to them when they realize that they are Israelis. And then they are writing in that article, why do they hate us so much? And that reminded me of the American question of why do they hate us so much? You are imposing all of this. You are sustaining and maintaining a system of a seemingly endless military occupation, a racist system of apartheid, suffocating sieges, home destructions and demolitions, uprooting of trees, including some of Palestine's most ancient olive orchards, stealing of land, water resources, imposing total limitations on the freedom of any Palestinians to go in or out, yet you are still wondering, why do we hate you so much? So the book is kind of a result of all of this. The fact that we are all engaged in these fantasy conversations about Palestine. Because we are told these are the only conversations that Western sensibilities can accommodate, basically. We have to talk about things that we are supposed to talk about. We need to talk about the one state and the two states. We want to talk that peace is still possible. We have to make painful compromises by, just sitting and talking unconditionally on a negotiations table somewhere. But maybe we need some positive, encouraging gestures. Maybe if the Palestinians concede just a little bit and the Israelis concede a little bit and we find a common ground. This is kind of the Henry Kissinger type of, philosophy in diplomacy. That's where the whole concept of the peace process starts from. It was a Kissinger idea that let's not assume that peace is something that can be achieved instantly, but maybe if we just sit and talk and maybe we get to know each other in a different way, we start making the kind of compromises that would lead to peace. And of course, that is not the case. It doesn't work that way. You can't expect that apartheid in South Africa could have possibly ended if black people made some compromises on the fact, like, okay, I am black, what can I do about it? And since I cannot really be as, at the same level of my white superiors, maybe I should accept a Bantustan here and a township there. That would have been completely, from a moral, but even practical, functional point of view, ridiculous. Nobody would accept that kind of political compromises. The problem is that we have been forced to engage in this discourse because we were told that any other discourse is a form of radicalism, terrorism, or at best you are a terrorist sympathizer. To the point that if you suggest any alternative to mainstream thinking about Palestine, are you Hamas? Immediately. Without really understanding how is that in any way overlaps with the Hamas political discourse. It doesn't matter. There is no room for deviation from the norm whatsoever. And that has been going on. This is not just a recent phenomenon. This has been going on for such a long time. If you read the Palestinian history as early as the 20th century, from where the Arab elites were told, you just need to go to London, you need to convince the Americans and the British to, look at your, case with some sympathy. And you need to create separation between you and those rebellious fallahin, the peasants of Palestine, who took up arms and fought against British colonialism as early as 1936. But this is not the kind of engagement we are looking for. We need to talk to the good Arabs, the moderate Arabs, the Arabs we can do business with. I've been actually asked that question many times, but it comes usually from people in official spaces. Ramzy, who is the strong Palestinian? Who is the Palestinian we can do business with? And I've been asked this. Americans are very keen on knowing the strong Palestinians that they can do business with. And you tell them Palestinians are a people. There are millions of them, and they are vastly different in many ways, united in other ways, and complicated as nations, because we come from too many different classes and political geographies, whether in Palestine or the Middle East, and you can't reduce this to the single individual. But by the way, this is even within the progressive, supposedly pro-Palestine movement. You also get asked a different twist on the same question. Who is the Palestinian Gandhi, for example? Who's your Palestinian Gandhi? So we have to constantly be able to produce answers immediately. This is our strong Palestinian, these are our Palestinian moderates, this is the Palestinian Gandhi, and so forth and so on. We've been engaged in this nonsensical conversations. And as Palestinian intellectuals and those who are involved in our discourse, we know that we are not going to actually get anything good out of it. Because you can't start a meaningful, real conversation based on falsehoods and fantasies. But again, we were forced to engage in this. And this is the same political game we have been playing for so many years. Palestinians are not united, and therefore Israel cannot engage in peaceful conversation or peace negotiations if there is no single Palestinian address. Netanyahu, that was Netanyahu's line. We need a single Palestinian address. We don't know. We do talk to Fatah, talk to the Hamas terrorists, talk to this, talk to that. We need, and then Palestinians come and say, okay, maybe it's time for us to create that political unity. So they go to Yemen, they go to Saudi Arabia, the Mecca Agreement, the Sana'a Agreement, the Cairo Agreement, the Bahrain Agreement, the Moscow Agreement, the Algeria Agreement, and every single time, they go back and they say, well, we just found a common denominator and we all signed an initial. Can we talk to us now? Then I remember when Condoleezza Rice called on Palestinians to unify their ranks. And they did. And they signed the Mecca Agreement. Condoleezza Rice 24 hours later said, Israel cannot be, you can't impose, no, we will not finance a government that works with terrorist groups. So Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, he said, okay, no agreements. We changed our minds and we moved on. So what do you want from us exactly? You want us to not to resist using violent means, but when we come up with BDS, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, and say this is civil society, non-violent, peaceful means of struggle, say, oh, you're trying to delegitimize Israel. And in a way, BDS is an existential threat to Israel. So what do you want from us exactly? And that's the point behind the book, and not just behind the book, behind the ideas that are now emanating and rising among many Palestinian groups and intellectuals, is just, we know the chase, we are chasing a mirage. No matter what we do, we'll never live up to the expectations, because you really have no expectations. You are just basically creating political distractions in order for Israel to take more of Palestinian lands, to build more settlements, to push Palestinians more into these small Bantustans in area A and B and C, to isolate Palestinians, to carry on with the so-called demographic war on Palestinians. The very existence of a Palestinian is a threat to Israel, because our numbers are rising at an alarming level. And at one point, Israeli Jews are going to be a minority, and Palestinians are actually being blamed for that. Imagine if someone comes and blame you in your own community, in your own city, in your own country, for rising in numbers in a way that might not be conducive to the demographic balances that interest someone else. How ridiculous that is, and the fact that we are constantly having to engage with that. And now we are saying we actually don't want to engage with that anymore. We want to develop a Palestinian narrative that caters to the sensibilities and priorities and the interests and the needs of the Palestinian people. It's as simple as that. And we know that we don't have the answers. We don't have the answers. Because again, we do not represent one ideology. We don't come from a single class. We don't live in a certain area. But we are all united in so many other ways as well. We are united in the fact that we want justice for our homeland and our people. We are united in wanting to dismantle Israeli apartheid, ending the Israeli occupation, stopping the expansionist policies that is destroying Palestinian lives in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and elsewhere. We want to end the siege. We support Palestinian resistance unconditionally. What type of resistance, in what political space, it all depends on what is beneficial to the Palestinian people, not to the sensibilities of Western governments. So the book, and Ilan already spoke at length about the structure of the book and the people involved in the book. But I just want to add to that is just ultimately the aim is not to provide answers as opposed to shift the conversation entirely. Take the conversation back to the Palestinian people. And since the Palestinian people do not currently have a representative democratic space in which they can express their aspirations, their political aspirations, we went to the next best thing, and that is the organic intellectual of Palestine, the engaged intellectual of Palestine. These are the people who are living the experience. They are struggling on a daily basis in order for them to do whatever they can for their people within their professional spaces, within their community spaces, within the West Bank, Gaza, Palestine 48, Jerusalem, but also Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Chile, Canada, Australia, the United States, and elsewhere. One last thing I would like to add to this is that in fact, the book starts with this quote by Che Guevara: "People do not need liberators; they liberate themselves." And okay, so initially I understood that, and in fact, I shaped my take on the book with that particular statement. I understood it to be, we don't want liberators from the outside. We don't need the white savior. We don't need Arab liberators come with their armies to, through Sinai and liberate the Palestinians. It is a mission that is entrusted to us as people, and we are capable of liberating ourselves. We just need the solidarity of everybody else. So we kind of have to define our relationship to our own struggle. We are the liberators as people. We need the solidarity of everyone else. And that is an incumbent moral and ethical responsibility on everybody. But I also thought about that quote in a different way. They liberate themselves. In other words, the liberation is not just about land. Liberation is also about the people themselves. It's either you are liberated as a human being, even if you think you are in a situation in which you are not liberated. Like when I first went to some Arab countries that I don't want to name, out of Gaza, where I was born and raised in Gaza, lived in a refugee camp, under siege. I thought we had absolutely no freedom whatsoever, and indeed in many ways we didn't. But when I went to other Arab countries and I began seeing this sense of inferiority they have, for example, toward the white man, towards the West, toward Western media, I started realizing, my goodness, in our own ways, as Palestinians, we are liberated at an intellectual level. We are aware of the fact that we are free people intellectually, but we cannot express that in the physical realm. And that is the struggle of the Palestinian people. How do we take that liberation into an additional step? And again, back to the point, you don't liberate, it's not just the land that you need to liberate, it's the people. And this is why one of our contributors comes from Santiago, from Chile, talking about the experience of the Palestinian community, which is about 500,000 people in Chile, and their relationship with their homeland. The fact that this community actually started decades before Israel was put on a map. They knew that they were Palestinians from the very start. They had a Palestinian identity. They built communities around that identity, whether they are Christians or Muslims. They started a football team around that identity. They adhere to the colors of the Palestinian flag based on that identity. They are as Palestinians as everybody else. And even when Palestine is physically liberated, I am sure that most of them are going to continue to live their lives in Chile. But why are they fighting for Palestine? They're not fighting just for the physical space. They're fighting for the identity, for the culture, for the history, for the roots, for themselves, to also be liberated in other ways. So the book was then this attempt at telling you, no, it's not about one state, two states, violence, non-violence, Hamas, Fatah. For Palestinians, the concept of liberation is vast and complex and fascinating. And in order for us to understand it correctly, we have to listen to them and we have to engage with them, because that's the proper way of actually placing this conversation on Palestine and its liberation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramzy, for this passionate and strong testimony of how we need to change our lenses in terms of the narrative and of the focus and of many of the cliches that we often somehow repeat when we think about this conflict. It's somehow, as you say, playing on the play button of an old recording and falling into sort of like that trap of just being in a sort of like a limited part or a limited aspect of a much larger community that is alive, that is diverse, that has a different language, as Ilan was saying, it cannot be just that same language that somehow I was just picturing that Kissinger's view of the world being imposed as somehow a social construct of how we can understand this conflict, or for that matter, many other conflicts or international relations today. So thank you very much for both Ilan and Ilan Pappé and Ramzy Baroud's somehow explanation of what this book is about, but also exposing this somehow let's say void in looking for other alternatives that is not either Oslo or the void or emptiness, right? So I'm sure that we will start getting some questions from our audience in the online channel. I don't know if anyone here has a question, or if Manuel wants to say something as well. I mean, I have some questions myself. No sé, Manuel, si quieres decir algo o alguna.
Well, I don't know, Manuel, if you've got any questions.
Vision is a new vision, not political, not organization. Is a proposal for individual liberation. That is the original message. I am very interested to read the book, no? Because it's a new perspective. Thank you very much.
So we have a question. Thank you, Manuel. There's a follower that's asking that with the social media and all these networks or networks of information, there seems to be more support for the Palestinian cause, more understanding maybe about what's going on in the Middle East and how the West or the Western hypocrisy has been exposed. And she seems to think that we are reaching a critical point in which Israel cannot justify its actions. So with all this in mind, she would like to know how both of you evaluate this winds of change. Will there be anytime soon a change in the status quo of Palestine and the Palestinian rights?
Thank you for the question. I agree. I think there is a dramatic shift in the attitudes towards Palestine in the global civil society, including in the West, including among Jewish communities around the world. And this is something very encouraging. The problem is that so far, this shift in public opinion has not influenced the policies of governments. It also did not succeed so far in influencing the mainstream media coverage of Israel and Palestine. And to a certain extent, it also has not reached important academic centers which produce, after all, the material for the educational system and the government and the media about Palestine. So we should be encouraged by the very clear shift in public opinion, but we should ask ourselves, why does it not reach the policymakers? Why does it not reach the mainstream media? Why does it not reach the mainstream academia? And I think this is an important topic for all of us to analyze. The danger is always not to fall into conspiracy theories, and there are quite a lot of them around, why Israel enjoys such immunity, whereas any other country that would have done the same would have not been treated in the same way. It's very clear. But in order to be precise and professional and not to fall into the trap of conspiracies, we actually are using recently, and this is a new development which I'm very happy about, we're using proper academic research. We're using proper professional research to explain why Israel enjoys immunity. So it's nothing mystical. It's not to do with anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. There is a very clear analysis that explains to us why Israel enjoys an unjustified immunity that allows it to continue the colonization. And one of the reasons is that we tend to forget that Zionism began as a Christian project before it was a Jewish one. It was an evangelical Protestant project that pushed the Jews to go and settle in Palestine, first because of anti-Semitic motivation, but more importantly from their point of view, because they believed that the so-called return of the Jews would precipitate the second coming of the Messiah, the resurrection of the dead. So it was a religious imperative. With time, this evolved into something far more powerful. There was a Judeo-Christian belief that the return of the Jews to Palestine is not only a fulfillment of a religious prophecy, it is the last bastion that would protect the Judeo-Christian civilization. Namely, there was a strong Islamophobic trend. Now, if you take together Christianity and Judaism, and you pose it against Islam, and then you follow the chronology over the years of how these representation of the different civilization and culture were presented, it's not surprising that it's still very easy in the West in particular, and in Europe as a whole, to persuade people that Israel cannot be condemned as any other country in the world, even if it commits the most heinous crimes against the Palestinians. Therefore, there cannot be Jewish racism. There can only be Christian racism, Islamic racism, Buddhist racism, but not Jewish racism. God forbid, Jews cannot be racist. And the basic idea of Zionism is racism. It's not a surprise that in 1975 the United Nations equated Zionism with racism. Not because it was anti-Semitic, because the African member states and the Arab member states identified a certain ideology as a racist ideology. It had nothing to do with Judaism. It had to do with a particular ideology of Zionism. So that's one thing that we have to deal. So in many ways, in order to get to the top on Palestine, you hope that the top will also change its Eurocentric, Western-centric superiority complex and behavior towards those who are not Western, to those who live in the Islamic world and the Arab world. So Palestine, fortunately or unfortunately, is not isolated. It's connected to this. For this, of course, we need involvement also of non-Western countries so that this would work. Secondly, a professional analysis has to give a credit to the Zionist movement. From the very beginning, they invested money and knowledge and effort in fabricating the history of Palestine, to my mind, fabricating the history of Jews as well, in order to justify the colonization of Palestine. They used the media, they used the academia, they used later the films, the movies. Nowadays they're using Netflix. This is something you have to admire them in a way, because this is quite impressive, that the whole country is recruited in order to sell a lie. The unfortunate thing is that this success comes at the cost of lives of their people. So I think if we will be able to complete a good analysis of why Israel is immune to all this criticism, hopefully we will be able to move from the level of civil society to the level of policies from above. By the way, and with this I will end, in the case of apartheid South Africa, the governments were the last ones to join their societies in imposing sanctions. It took about 20 years before the first action in civil society against South Africa took place, and the first ever government that was brave enough to say, we are sanctioning apartheid South Africa. So these processes take place. I do believe that they will happen, and I would just add another one. It would be very interesting to see how the Jewish community in the world reacts to the new fascist Israeli government. Will they be able to continue and say to themselves, oh no, this is a fantastic democracy that the Jews have created in the non-democratic Arab world? Will they still be able to say that with Ben Gvir as a minister, with the fascist and racist people who are now ruling Israel? It would be very interesting to see how elastic is Jewish moral values in the world, because this is a key issue for the future. Thank you.
Anything else to add, Ramzy? I just maybe wanted to follow up on that question on the Israeli society, because in the end they have voted this government. So, I mean, you were posing the question of you know, how did we maybe get to this moment? And I don't know if it's, I think of that postmodern philosopher Byung-Chul Han, who talks about the burnout society, how we have so much, we're all burnout and have so much fatigue that we might just press the button for the sake of, oh, let's have Bibi back again, because it's just, life is so much easier with him. But turns out that he has these very nasty friends. But, you know, there's that question of how, you know, it's not only a government, it's actually the people voting for them. They seem to be also a bit out of the loop regarding the awareness or consciousness that this is not the right path.
No, of course, I mean, the problem is the Zionist ideology, not the specific government. This specific government just manifests more ultimately, more extremely, what's wrong with Zionism. But let's remember, it was the Zionist left that exercised or implemented the ethnic cleansing of 1948. It was the Zionist left that imposed the military rule on Palestinians from 1948 up to the rise of the Likud in 1977. So, in other words, this is an indoctrinated society that lives under a certain ideological rule, if you want, a racist one. And of course, there are no viable political alternatives among the Jewish society nowadays. So what I was saying is not that now Israel is worse than it was before. I'm saying that now maybe the world would understand what we were talking about in the last 50 years. That's my hope. I don't think Palestinians in the Gaza Strip would suffer less or more under this government or in the West Bank. How worse can it get? It's so bad. I mean, this supposedly alternative government is responsible for the killing of Palestinian children in numbers that none of the right-wing parties in Israel was ever responsible for. So they are killing children without any hesitation, and they are supposedly on the Israeli left. So this is not the issue. The issue is, will this somehow send a message to the world, you know, this is the true face of Zionism. So don't seek a peace camp in Israel. Treat the Israeli society, Jewish society, as you have treated the white society in apartheid South Africa. That's the message, I think.
A quick note on the question regarding social media and the tide is turning and all of that. I agree. I think there is something is shifting in the balances of how the world understands and Israel and the Palestinian struggle. Historically, Israel kind of had an easy ride. So you had this situation in which Israel colonized and occupied Palestine with the help of the British. There was already a very strong narrative that was created in the West around, the Jews going back to their ancestral homelands, and and the bad Arabs are preventing them from achieving this, this desired outcome. And for many years, Israel has succeeded in creating a narrative that, as long as it's embraced by mainstream media, the Israeli version of that narrative ended up being the true narrative. Let's say that there is a particular event that you and I saw, or a conflict you and I had, Karim, and I ended up telling everyone about what has actually taken place. And when it was your turn to do so, you were shut out completely. You were not given any space. You were not allowed to speak. And in the process of doing so, I was the good guy, you were the bad guy, even though it was actually my fault in the first place. The fact that Palestinians have been shut out from the media for such a long time left us with really so very few options. It was kind of telling, but quite sad, that during a period in which a few leftist Palestinian groups hijacked airplanes, and I'm sure that you're familiar with that history. They hijacked airplanes in order for them to raise awareness of the Palestinian cause. And I know for people who are outside that circle, when they it's like, what does it mean? You hijack airplanes in order for you to raise awareness of your struggle? That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But if you actually think about it from a historical context, you can imagine how entrapped and isolated and alienated and marginalized the Palestinians must have been, that they would actually have to do something ridiculous in order for the world to come and say, oh yeah, we noticed you. And you are Palestinians, and what are you fighting for exactly? Okay, that sort of thing. Complete marginalization of the Palestinian. We just do not exist. I mean, when Golda Meir said, it's not like we came and we, pushed a group of people out of their land, calling themselves the Palestinians. She said the Palestinians simply did not exist. That was in her infamous interview in 1967, or was it 1969? I can't remember. Sometimes in the late 60s. But really, in her mind, we actually didn't exist, because we were irrelevant to whatever grand scheme the Zionists had in mind. And for Europe, we also didn't exist, because we were also irrelevant to whatever colonial grand scheme the West had in mind. And so for us Palestinians, it's also been a struggle, not just for existence, but also to show that we actually have a narrative, we have a story, we have a people, we have a history that goes way before the Balfour Declaration, thousands of years before Israel was even established. We were a people, we were mentioned in the Quran. Herodotus spoke about Palestine. Shakespeare spoke about Palestine. We are a real thing. We're not an invention, as, what's his name, the former Republican presidential candidate, when he said the Palestinians are an invented people. That was in the previous elections. We're not an invented people, and we shouldn't be fighting for that kind of space. What happened is that social media challenged some of those dynamics. It wasn't by design, really. It's just they opened up a space in which everybody is a user. Well, many of those users are pro-Palestinians or Palestinians or people who care about issues that have been kept out of the editorials of the New York Times. They're not a subject of discussion on CNN. They are irrelevant to the BBC. And suddenly, Israel finds itself on the defensive. So what Israel is trying to do right now, and I really don't think they will succeed in doing, is to try to silence the conversation on Palestine on social media. How do you do that? I mean, by doing this, or by attempting to doing this, you will basically essentially erase the whole idea behind social media. That is an open source and it's generated by random users all over the world.
Did you ask Elon Musk to do it for you?
Perhaps. Actually, Twitter shut down my account once. Facebook shut down I had 4 pages and my profile page, 4 pages with about my books, my events, they shut them down, 4. I still have my profile page. Twitter shut down my account. But here's the thing. When Twitter shut down my account, I just said, hey everybody, Twitter shut down my account. I didn't do anything. But what ended up happening is that it was in the news. And social media users start writing about it. And people who are far more important on social media than I could ever be start retweeting and so forth. And suddenly, Twitter is actually forced to reinstall my account. So the social media battle is a very, very important battle. It hasn't been won yet. I don't know what Israel is thinking of how do you actually deal with this. They have an agreement with Facebook on how to ensure that Palestinians are being silenced and so forth and so on. But Israel is actually facing a real crisis of narratives because they are no longer the ones holding all the cards. And could some teenage girl from Gaza, with 1 million followers, could actually have greater impact on certain specific elements of that narrative of what has actually happened in the May 2021 war. Maybe she actually has more impact than the Israeli Foreign Ministry or the Israeli Defense Ministry. And that is terrifying for Israel. So now they are trying to redefine everything. Let's redefine what, this new definition of anti-Semitism to include being anti-Zionist to actually, equating anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. I actually don't think that this is a show of Israel's power as it's being promoted. I think it shows Israel's panic and weakness, that they know that they have controlled this so-called conflict through controlling the narrative, and now they are losing track of that narrative, losing control of that narrative, and have to face up to the fact that people are beginning to refer to Israel as apartheid Israel. The hashtag apartheid Israel apartheid, has been trending for years. Not a single day or a single hour in which that hashtag was not trending. What do you do once you are branded as an apartheid? All of your hasbara, all of your propaganda will do very little to offset that brand. That's why Israel is in a real problem, and this is why I'm a big believer in people, not in governments. Not as a sentimental concept, but I really feel like ultimately it will be the Palestinian people who will liberate Palestine. Ultimately, it will be the solidarity of ordinary people, whether in Spain, in Europe, in America, in Africa, anywhere in the world, that will actually put enough pressure on their governments to actually change their strategies and tactics and perceptions of Palestine and Israel.
Thank you very much, Ramzy. I think many of the people who have reviewed the book or who have quotes the book are pretty outstanding people in terms of defending social and human rights, or who are very committed, such as John Pilger, a very well-known journalist, or Ken Loach, or even Roger Waters, the founding member of Pink Floyd. He actually dedicates one of his songs to Darwish, "Wish You Were Here." I think it's a really powerful and the testimonies you have gathered there. We really hope we will draw the attention of one of our friendly Spanish publishers who may want to actually do the translation and have it inhabit the Spanish-speaking world. I just wanted maybe to finish with a question on, you said something about chasing the mirage, and you start also your introduction by recalling that period of time when Palestinians were hoping that the Arab armies or the Muslim armies or brothers or whatever you want to call it would come and liberate them. And this, at some point, somehow that dream was squashed by the reality that wouldn't happen. But recently, I think it has been completely, probably buried by the Abraham Agreement. And you've literally just mentioned how, liberating yourselves or liberating people doesn't require other people or other countries coming to liberate you. So I just want you to, both of you, possible to just give us a short assessment of how does the agreements between some Arab countries and Israel have also changed the language, because you were mentioning that this comes to try and change the language, to change this Hungarian world we live in, or we have inherited, and many of your Palestinian countrymen also fall in the same trap and speak the same language. It's like patriarchy somehow, right? That we speak from that point of view, and it's very difficult to break that or to step out of that seat that you have been given and where you have been taught that let's say doctrine of how we perceive the world. So briefly, how do the Abraham Accords or agreements come to also change the language, and doesn't that also shift the center and it's more confusing for many of your countrymen?
Absolutely. I will address this quickly, and then Ilan will have the last word. You might find this is a bit surprising when I say that actually I am not entirely disappointed by the normalization between Israel and some Arab countries. I think it's so very important in politics to have clarity, a sense of clarity of where you actually stand on a certain issue. Many Arab countries have been normalizing with Israel for years and years. They have been paying lip service to the Palestinians, but they have done so very little to actually help the Palestinians. In fact, if anything, they have used Palestine as a way to kind of validate themselves politically within their own political spaces and political domains. You would get the impression that it's the Jordanian king or the Sudani president or the Emirati emir or so forth that has actually have the interests of the Palestinian people at heart, and then suddenly we realize that all this normalization is taking place and clarity at last. We know where you stand on this issue, and we know that you actually never been truly sincere about your solidarity with the Palestinian people. So this, fig leaf has fallen, and we see you for who you are. I think it's quite interesting, actually, that an Arab country, one of the normalizers today, said to Israel that they were critical of Israel regarding the formation of the government, right? So they said, if annexation is back on the table, this goes against our normalization agreement. And I was like, why are they taking a political stance on annexation? They never really cared in the first place. And I really do think that this whole pro-Palestine popular appeal that's happening in Qatar Palestine is the main issue. Everybody is talking about Palestine. Palestinian flags are everywhere, to the point that there was actually one Arab fan that agreed to speak to Israeli media, and he was attacked by the other fans, and they dragged him out front of the camera. It must be now finally dawning on some of these Arab normalizers that this was a risky move. Because because Palestine validates you politically, and if you are invalidated, that's your source of legitimacy. There are no democratic elections in these countries. So how do you get you need legitimacy. Even in non-democratic countries, you need legitimacy. How do you obtain your legitimacy now? If you have betrayed Palestine, the aspiration of the Palestinians, and therefore your own people, and you also have no other alternative form of legitimacy. So there is a legitimacy crisis, and I really don't think this is as much of a problem for the Palestinians as much as it's a problem for those who have normalized. Now, normalization has its own geopolitical reasons of why it happened, and sadly, a lot of these reasons are not even related to the Palestinians themselves. But these Arab countries were convinced the Arabs have moved on. The Arab Spring has created major distractions from Palestine. Palestine is no longer the main issue. And therefore, if we normalize with Israel, nothing is going to happen. So a major polling company, American company, went to the Middle East and asked the populations of the most populous 9 Arab countries, what are the most important issue for all Arabs? And every single one of these countries said Palestine. Even those who are going through their own rebellions and their own civil wars and their own conflicts still perceived, even Yemen, which is as sad as this may be, considering that Yemen is being annihilated as we speak. The majority of Yemenis still believe that Palestine is still the issue. So our early fears that normalization is the beginning of the end for us, the Arabs don't care, others are going to join in, the Arab people are looking somewhere else, it's over, that turned out not to be the case at all. And they have to deal with these terrible political decisions that they have made, and I think those decisions will eventually prove costly. If not today, it's tomorrow.
Yeah, very little to add to what Ramzy said. I think that in the case of most of these countries, it was a wish to get closer to the United States that motivated normalization. In the case of maybe the UAE and Bahrain, also fear of Iran pushed them to normalize relationship with Israel. But I think the most important issue in the Arab world is not a threat from Iran and not to strengthen economic or strategic relationship with America. I think the major issue in places such as Syria, Yemen, Libya, is the issue of human rights and civil rights. And it's incredible that these elites are not dealing with a major problem in the Arab world. A close connection to America has never improved anyone's human rights record. America doesn't care about human rights. It cares about what it calls its national interest. And if its national interest demands the continue of the violation of human rights in Chile or in Nicaragua, they have no problem in supporting these regimes. As for Iran, a more solidified military power to deter Iran would not improve the human rights record either in Iran or in the Arab world. And it's very clear that one of the best ways to produce an authentic, genuine conversation about human rights and civil rights in the Arab world is to include Palestine in this conversation. That's the only way that will make people, on the basis of what also Ramzy said, would make people in the Middle East or in the Arab world believe that there is a genuine interest outside the area to help and solve these issues. But if you exempt Israel from the conversation of human rights violation, civil rights violation, you do not allow the world to contribute constructively to this main problem. So I think the normalization process is just another layer that manifests the total detachment of the Arab regime from the problems of their own societies, their aspirations. But with this I will end, let's face it, the political elites of the West are also not entirely listening to the main aspirations of their people. Ecology doesn't interest the government. Poverty doesn't interest the governments. The wish to create multicultural, multi-ethnic societies doesn't interest the governments. And therefore we have a crisis of political elites in the world at large, not only in the Arab world. So I think that normalization is a feature of the same period that quite a few people tried to change in 2008 in the West and in the Arab world in 2011. But these are very fresh attempts, and to conclude that they've already failed is too premature. So I think that a revolution in the society's ability to force their political elites to attend genuinely to the problems of the world and their own problem goes through a genuine support for the Palestinian people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as usual, we get lots of last-minute questions from our friends on the other side of the screen. So we'll give them a chance, although we're reaching our time. So Ella asks, how can just ordinary people support the Palestinian cause? How efficient is how efficient is the movement, the BDS movement against Israel? It seems that it seems to be quite strong in the UK, but can you please tell us what can we do? And and one last one, it's kind of like related to the normalization question. Francisco Javier Lara asks if you could say something regarding the acknowledgement or the recognition of Israel on behalf of Morocco after Israeli recognition of the Moroccan sovereignty over the Western Sahara. Similarly to what happened when Israel gave the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt. That's Francisco Javier Lara's question, and the previous one by Ella says, if you could sum it up to
and very quickly, so how to support the Palestinian people? I think you should listen to the Palestinian people. You should read what they write. You should engage with them, with their rightful demands. Make them the center of the conversation. I think solidarity, we have to distinguish between solidarity and intellectual replacement. This idea that I am in solidarity with you, but you can't speak for yourself. I know better and I know how to speak for you. It doesn't work that way. Solidarity means that I am, as a Palestinian or other Palestinians, we speak for ourselves and you stand in solidarity with us. You provide us with the platforms, with the support, with the mobilization that would allow us to achieve our goals. BDS is a very important movement, not because, and some people make that argument that, well, you know, the United States is giving Israel a lot of money, billions of dollars, in fact, $3.8 billion a year, and other Western governments are supporting Israel, and every, Germans are giving the submarines, the British are giving them this and that. So what kind of impact will your boycott have on the Palestinian, on the Israeli economy? But this is really not just about economy. It's not about Israeli products and Israeli hummus, if there's such a thing. It is about something much bigger. It's actually about accountability. That we are actually moving from the seats of the spectators, and we are moving to hold you accountable for what you are doing to the Palestinian people. And if that accountability means I will not invite you to my university, I will not buy your product, be it hummus or be it anything else, and I will not recognize you, not even in sports events, not even in any possible way, until you accept the fact that the Palestinian people deserve respect, deserve basic human rights, deserve justice, and deserve freedom, then this boycott is going to continue. So this is indeed, I mean, when Netanyahu said once that the BDS movement is trying to delegitimize Israel, he actually is right. We are trying to delegitimize Israel, but not Israel as as the state of the Jewish people. We are trying to delegitimize Israel as an apartheid regime, because apartheid should be delegitimized. So engage with BDS, understand the Palestinian point of view, educate yourself on this, and mobilize and do whatever you can. The very simple act of not engaging with an Israeli product or going to visit Palestine, ultimately it means that you are a political actor. And you are taking an initiative, and you are kind of deciding what side you are on, and hopefully you are going to be on the right side. Sadly, what happened in Morocco is a particularly sad case, because in the case of the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, it's different, because as Ilan has said, this is all about kind of, they need protection against Iran. And, these countries are always looking for a big protector. They went after Saddam Hussein at one point, prior to that, some other country, after that, some other country. They feel vulnerable. But Morocco is a different case, and indeed Sudan is a different case. Sudan is an extremely vulnerable country because of the political instability, the poverty, and so forth and so on. So it was the matter of removing Sudan from the terrorist list, the American terrorist list, in exchange for an Israeli normalization, and therefore the Sudanese will be able to get few investments. So it was very, not just sad, but really very a horrible way of exchanging, kind of ending the siege and providing for the people with, give us your political, validation of Israel. The case of Morocco, the Moroccan people historically have been some of the most supportive of Palestinians. Whenever there is a protest for Palestine in Morocco, they usually don't go out in their thousands, but in their millions. And to actually watch this happening in Morocco itself was particularly heartbreaking for us Palestinians, because we know that Morocco means real, genuine solidarity. And to make the exchange at such a way that you recognize my sovereignty over the Sahara and I will give you what you want regarding Palestine was a very low blow from the Moroccan government. And in fact, I think that the devastating political loss of the previous government, I really do think that Palestine played a very important role of why their people have disowned the government that signed the normalization agreement with Israel. So I think that we have to analyze each country separately based on their own geopolitics and their own space, but at the end of the day, it really was this. You give me something and I will throw Palestine and the Palestinians under the bus. And that's precisely what they did.
Okay. Bueno, pues just round up with thanking everyone who's here in Córdoba, but also everyone who's listening to our. No sé si querías decir algo, Manuel, antes de despedirnos. Everyone who was.
I wanted to say something.
Thank you for our interpreter, who's done an amazing job. But sometimes it gets fast in here,
That's right. That's
with
true.
enthusiasm. And just saying that if you want also to, as Ramzy was saying, to listen to Palestinians, you may want to give this a try, because it's actually a fantastic book. Read the book. We're gonna take, I think it's 5 copies of the book to our bookshop, to Librería Balquís in Casa Árabe. For anyone interested, because Ramzy has brought with him some copies of the book. We'll take them to the bookshop, to our librería in Casa Árabe, Madrid. If anyone wants to go and purchase one of these there, it'll be there. Pues sin más, muchísimas gracias a todas y a todos los que.
Very much to all of you who have come over. Follow us through social media, and you can get back to recommend this session, be it in Spanish or in a few days it will also be available in English in our YouTube channel. Thank you and see you soon.